Hello and welcome to Changing Tides, Fires, Blooms, and a Warming Climate. My name is Bonnie Wright. I am an advocate for our environment. I'm an author, an actress, and a filmmaker, and I'm really honored to be part of this incredibly important conversation today. I am a resident here of the Santa Monica Mountains, so I am deeply, deeply connected to the Santa Monica Bay. And whilst I wasn't directly affected by the recent fires, I have many loved ones and community that were. So I am deeply involved and concerned to be part of the future stepping forward. And as a mother as well, I'm also deeply concerned about the health of my family. So I'm really, really pleased and honored to be part of this talk today, as the two people joining us today are really on the front line working to protect our beautiful coastline. So today I'm joined by Heal the Bay CEO Tracy Quinn. Tracy has dedicated her career to improving water quality in our rivers and ocean and ensuring safe, reliable, and affordable water for all Californians. Tracy started her career as an engineer, designing water infrastructure in Southern California and working with municipal and industrial clients to improve water quality. Most recently, Tracy served as the Director of California Urban Water Policy at the NRDC, where she led efforts to pass and implement climate adaptation legislation and improve climate resilience and water affordability throughout California. Welcome, Tracy.
Thank you, Bonnie. It's great to see you.
You too. And so for our next speaker, we are joined by Marine Mammal Care Center's Chief Operations and Education Officer, Dave Bader. Dave and the Marine Mammal Care Center is on the front lines of a recent domoic acid outbreak, unlike anything we have ever seen before, rescuing and rehabilitating dozens of sick sea lions and other marine mammals suffering from the effects of neurotoxin. Their expert team provides around-the-clock care, administering fluids, medication, and supportive treatment to give these animals the best chance of survival. As harmful algal blooms become more frequent with warming ocean conditions, Marine Mammal Care Center work is more vital than ever in protecting marine life and coastal ecosystems. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you so much.
And welcome to everyone who's joining us. I'm so pleased there are so many of you, and I'm going to dive into a question for Tracy. So a healthy ocean is essential to the health of the planet and humanity's survival. Can you talk a little bit about how climate change and human activities are threatening the health of the ocean and what Heal the Bay is doing to protect and restore coastal waters here in LA?
Thanks, Bonnie. Yeah, sure. First and foremost, I think, you spoke to this in your introduction. Our oceans are such a magical, spiritual place. They are so incredibly beautiful. And, I think most people, get giddy like a child, and squeal when you see a dolphin or a whale, or there's just something really special about our ocean. And, it's also just a critical place for human survival. It provides critical benefits that we need. Our oceans produce half of the planet's oxygen. They regulate global temperatures, and they actually capture carbon. And you are absolutely right. Human activities are threatening the health of our oceans, and we are quickly approaching a tipping point for human survival. So when our oceans capture carbon, they do that by, they're absorbing carbon dioxide. Unfortunately, that also makes our oceans acidic. Warming ocean temperatures exacerbate this ocean acidification and then can also lead to extreme weather events like hurricanes. On top of that, we have just been treating the ocean like a giant trash can for decades, using it to dispose of everything from chemical weapons to dangerous toxins and even human waste. So it's no surprise that our oceans are hurting. When Heal the Bay was founded 40 years ago, the Santa Monica Bay was essentially a dead zone, and lifeguards and surfers would regularly get sick from entering the water. Since 1985, Heal the Bay has used science and policy, community engagement, and education to protect and restore the bay. First, by galvanizing Angelenos under the leadership of our founder, Dorothy Green, to stand up to the city of Los Angeles and demand upgrades to the Hyperion wastewater treatment plant in El Segundo that was dumping hundreds of millions of gallons sewage into our coastal waters of pollution in the Bay, stormwater, and single-use plastic. We've passed local measures to fund stormwater capture projects, which keep pollution from reaching the Bay. We serve as watchdogs for strong water quality regulations, and we've helped pass legislation to reduce the production of single-use plastics in California. And after January 7th, we have turned our attention to the pollution entering the Bay after the recent fires. As an organization, we've been able to translate water quality data into really easy to understand report cards for the public. And so we were uniquely qualified to look at the chemicals that were going out into the Bay and be able to analyze and provide data to the public to let them know, when it was safe or what was going on in the ocean and how it was going to impact their health. Oops, I think you're muted, Bonnie.
Thanks. Sorry, yes, thanks for sharing that. And when aerial footage started to emerge of the devastation so close to the coast, many in our community, including myself, were very worried about the impacts to our ocean. And I also read that during the January fires, there was a research boat out in the Bay that reported ash coating the ocean surface as far as 100 miles offshore. Could you just share the actions Heal the Bay took in response to this?
Yeah, when we saw those images of the ash and the ash clouds sort of heading out over the ocean and saw the images of ash coating the surface, we knew that there were going to be significant water quality impacts. So one of the first things that we did was did some research to understand what are the types of things that we need to be testing for. When you think about the structures that burned, there were electric cars and lithium ion batteries. There were a lot of solar panels. Pretty much everything in a modern home these days is made of plastic. And so, we needed to figure out what are we going to look at. So we put together a sampling plan, and that included heavy metals, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PCBs, turbidity, nutrients, and bacteria, among, and even PFAS, I think, the forever chemical that's been getting a lot of attention and is really ubiquitous to almost everything that we use as well. And we went out and we did testing at 10 different sites. We looked at two testing areas that were north of the burn area in Malibu. We looked at 5 sampling locations that were within the burn area. And we looked at 3 more sites south of the burn area. Generally in Southern California, the water quality, or the currents flow south. And so we expected that there might be some contamination that had flowed off from the burn areas, or deposited from ash and were flowing south towards Dockweiler in the South Bay. And we wanted to make sure we really fully understood that. And then we had the rains at the end of January, and it was a first flush rain event, which means that, it hadn't rained in almost a year. So everything that had built up in our storm drain system, everything that had been thrown out on sidewalks and streets was all going to be coming to our beaches and out into our ocean. The watershed in Los Angeles is massive. So if you drop a piece of trash or you don't pick up after your dog in Pasadena or Pacoima, that's all going to end up out into the Santa Monica Bay. And so we wanted to test after that to see what were the impacts, and were we still seeing impacts of the fires after that first flush event? Was it making it worse because water was flowing over the debris, or was it diluting it, potentially? And then there was another even more intense storm on February 3rd, the week of February 13th, culminating in intense mudslides and debris flow getting into the ocean. And so testing was also conducted by the Department of Public Health and Regional Water Board after that event, and we analyzed that data as well. We have been the only organization that has been analyzing the data and providing information to the public. But it's been a challenge because the types of contaminants that we're seeing in the ocean aren't things that are normally screened for. There's no baseline data for us to compare this new data to. And making it even more challenging in understanding what the public health risk is that we don't have published recreational risk thresholds for a lot of these contaminants either. So looking at the data and really determining how this was going to impact human health was quite a challenge. So we looked at things like the California Ocean Plan, which has human health limits, although those are for fish consumption. And then we looked at drinking water limits, which would be a little bit more conservative than recreational limits because nobody's going out there and drinking 64 ounces of ocean water. And when you're looking at your risk tolerance or your risk threshold, you're really looking at the type of exposure. So is it skin contact? Are you inhaling it? Are you ingesting it? How long are you being exposed? Are you drinking 100 ounces of water? Are you accidentally ingesting maybe a few milliliters? And then you look at the concentration of the contaminant, and that will kind of tell you what your risk is. So what we found was that partially, because of the dilution factor of these contaminants coming out of our storm drain system or being deposited into the ocean, the currents were likely mixing them. There was a lot of wave action getting those moved around. Potentially some of that contamination was settling at the bottom of the ocean. What we saw in the water was a lot better than we expected. And in fact, only 3 of the 116 contaminants that we looked at exceeded a public health limit of any kind and needed further investigation. And so we looked at those. Those were arsenic, beryllium, and then the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. When we met with toxicologists or looked at what these risk thresholds could be, we were provided an EPA calculator where you can plug in a bunch of factors and it spits it out. And so it spits out what the risk threshold is. When you put in, okay, I'm going to spend 4 hours a day in the ocean and I'm going to be in the ocean for 120 days, which is a lot. I mean, that is like some of our most dedicated surfers. We found that the risk thresholds there were pretty high. And so the water quality that we were seeing was generally better than that. The one exception being arsenic. And so a lot of our county public health officials and the folks at the regional board and other toxicologists have taken a look at that. And they have shared with us that the arsenic levels, although high and potentially above a healthy limit, are within the background limits of what they would expect to see in the ocean. Arsenic is a naturally occurring parameter. And so we do see it both in our soils in Southern California and we're learning out in our oceans at some pretty high levels. But what this tells us is that we need to continue monitoring. We need to continue this research. We're advising people to take caution if they're going out into the ocean and to be aware that these are contaminants that won't make you sick immediately, but they can contribute in the long term to chronic health issues. And so we're trying to be really transparent because, risk tolerance is a really personal decision. And we want people to be able to have the information and the data to make that decision for themselves.
Yeah, it definitely is a hard decision for everyone. And that's, I'm sure, why many people are here today. So thanks for everything that you're doing at Heal the Bay and hopefully making it more accessible and available for people to understand it in easy terms. So obviously you've spoken a lot about humans, but we have all our beautiful marine life. So I'd love to move over to Dave and ask you a question. We have seen, I'm sure many of you have seen, and maybe if you haven't, on social media or the news, the devastating impacts on our sea life from the recent domoic acid outbreak. I would love if you could share a little bit about what you're seeing and why it's happening and how Marine Mammal Care Center has been helping.
Yeah, right now we're seeing an unprecedented outbreak of harmful algal bloom. There's an algae out there that's producing a toxin. The toxin is called domoic acid, and it builds up through the food chain and gets into top-level predators like sea lions, dolphin, and seabirds. It's a neurotoxin. It attacks nervous system, causes nerves to fire uncontrollably. And so we see symptoms from these animals like really extreme seizures. We see repetitive behaviors, vomiting, really very sick animals. And they're showing up on beaches from all along the coast of Southern California. It started right here off the coast of Los Angeles and has spread since then. We're in week 10 of this event, which is also unprecedented. And this is the 4th year in a row of a harmful algal bloom like this. Typically, these would come every 3 to 7 years, with some periodicity, but not every single year. And so we're really in uncharted waters about what the impact of this might be long term on our local marine mammal population, also seabird populations. This is, again, another impact of climate change, ocean acidification, like Tracy mentioned, and eutrophication of our coastal ocean. All of these, in combination are producing conditions that are more favorable for the formation of harmful algal blooms. And that's something that's happening worldwide in both the ocean and in fresh water. So it's been pretty impactful for us here. We've exceeded, we typically see about 300 animals over the course of a year, and that's what we budget for. We are already over 300 animals for the year in our first quarter. And to give you an example of how busy we've been in basically the month of March, we saw 191 live animal rescues, where we typically see about 55 in the same time period. So we're really seeing something pretty massive, and it's not really abating. They typically have lasted, the last one in 2023 that affected Southern California lasted 8.5 weeks. So the fact that we're getting into week 10, and that one was longer than any previous, we're hopeful that something positive might happen, conditions can change, but right now it's not looking good for that.
Oh, it's so sad. And obviously so many people, including myself, have witnessed this happening along our coast. So for all of us, when these animals do wash up on the shore, what is the best thing that we can do to help?
Yeah, thank you for asking. The first and foremost thing is to give the animals space. We in Los Angeles, we love our beaches. It's a space for recreation, but we have to recognize that it is a wild space. As soon as you step your foot on the sand, it's the same as going to the Santa Monica Mountains or wherever else you might go to nature. As soon as you step on the beach, you're in nature. You should expect to see wildlife. And you should respect that wildlife, give it the space that it deserves. We ask people to give them at least 50 feet of space. If you think it's an animal that might be in trouble, you want to give us a call at 800-39-WHALE. That will get to our rescue hotline, and we'll be able to assess the situation, respond to the animal, rescue it hopefully, and bring it back to the care center here for rehabilitation and eventually release. One thing that we want to see, that we're seeing right now, is an incredible number of dolphin that are stranding. And unfortunately for this event, the dolphin, it's a 100% mortality event for them. It's really hitting these dolphins very hard. And when they show up on our beaches, they are either dead already or they're about to die. They're having seizures right there in the surf. And for these animals, it's really important that we give those animals the dignity that they deserve in these last moments, before they pass on. It's a hard thing to do, but a lot of people want to put them back into the ocean. That's going to cause the animal additional stress, and it will eventually drown if we do that. So as hard as it may be, we still need to give all of these animals space and give them respect and dignity in their last moments. For our seals and sea lions, we do have a chance to rescue and rehabilitate some of those animals. They often come to our beaches in a much better condition. And we're doing our best to get to each of those. But the number of animals that we're seeing on our local beaches is really overwhelming and has really exceeded the resources that we have available to get to and treat every single animal.
Yeah, it's so sad. And I hope I'm going to ask you this towards the end of just what we can do. I feel like when we can all be upset and grieving for all these losses we're seeing, we can really switch and turn that energy into action. So we'll get to that later into the discussion. But before we move on from this point, would love to just hear a little bit, Tracy, about this in terms of the testing that you were doing. Just what did that show you about the marine health and what's next for Heal the Bay's testing?
Yeah, I think that there was a lot of concern from the public that the heavy metals that we were seeing in the ocean and some of these other fire-related contaminants were causing the mortality that we were seeing. And we did see heavy metal levels that exceeded marine health limits. But just like in humans, these heavy metals don't generally cause immediate harm. They will, they have the ability to bioaccumulate in the bodies of the marine life and then work their way up through the food chain. And so you can over time see, pretty significant levels in sort of the top of the food chain, the animals in the top of the food chain. And then, that can also end up on our plates and, can then impact human health in that way. So it's really important for us to know what these concentrations are in the ocean over time. And so, this again speaks to the need to really understand and monitor for a significant period of time. Because we monitored and looked at the sort of what we expected to be the 3 worst events for water quality in the bay, those 3 big pollutant loading events of the ash deposition, the first flush rain, and the intense rains on February 13th. But if the heavy metals dissipate over time and that concentration lowers, then there may be less of an impact on marine life over in the long term. So we really want to make sure that we're monitoring and caring for that and really looking after that and being able to analyze that data. We were very lucky to have a generous donor who is helping us to continue some monitoring and really also being able to look offshore. So we did our testing all around near shore, and that's really because that's where the humans spend most of our time. But when we want to understand the health of the ocean, we have to get out into the ocean. And so we will be partnering with a group of divers to go out and do an exploratory dive. We're going to collect data from the ocean floor. They're in early trips, they have observed ash coating the ocean floor. So we want to test that and see what is in that ash on the ocean floor, look for additional debris that might have been out there, and then also test water from throughout the water column offshore. That'll give us a much better understanding of what the marine life are facing in terms of their habitat.
Okay, thank you for sharing. Okay, well, thank you so much. I know there's been some questions that have been sent in ahead of today. And also I know maybe people are aware that you can also ask your own questions here in the chat, if I'm right. But thank you both for your incredible work, and local advocacy is just critical for these very beautiful environments of the ocean. They obviously protect us, but we need to look after them. So we've had a few pre-submitted questions, but I just want to say that obviously there's so many more questions and answers to these very nuanced and detailed and layered topics. So if there's something that doesn't get answered today during the hour we have, we're going to have the 2 emails from Heal the Bay and Marine Mammal Care put into the chat. I believe they're both info@healthebay.org and info@marinemammalcare.org. So if something doesn't get answered and you really want it to, make sure you follow up with that afterwards. So our first question is from Ryan in Redondo Beach, and he has asked, the current domoic acid outbreak is really bad, and it started after the fires. Did phosphorus contribute to it?
Yeah, so runoff contains nutrient, and nutrient is fertilizer for algae to grow. But all runoff that comes out of our urban system or from agricultural system is going to carry with it some nutrient. So undoubtedly, there was some contribution to the blooms from runoff from the fires. But in our Southern California ocean system, we have an amazing biodiversity and abundance of life that's out here. And that's because we have this amazing upwelling of nutrients. So as winds blow along the coast, we get a replacement of surface waters with deep, cool, nutrient-rich waters, and that also spurs a natural plankton bloom. And it's been really powerful this year. But again, we have to recognize we're in year 4 of these harmful algal blooms, and we've only had a fire this past year. So while undoubtedly runoff in all of its forms contributes to algal blooms, the fire itself is not a smoking gun for why we're seeing such a devastating harmful algal bloom right now. Unfortunately, it's bigger picture problems that we're having, such as climate change, ocean acidification, and eutrophication, bigger than just these runoff events that are changing those conditions for this, you know, in our conditions in our local waters.
Okay, thanks for that. And the next question in the chat here today is: seafood from the Channel Islands and from Baja up to Santa Barbara safe to eat with all the domoic acid? And what about given the arsenic levels? So yeah, is our seafood safe to eat?
For domoic acid, I can answer that. Is anything that makes its way into a restaurant or the grocery store, anything you can purchase in that way is going to be tested and is going to be safe for consumption. Anything wild caught right now or harvested could potentially be impacted by that domoic acid. The best thing to do is to go to the California Public Health webpage under shellfish closures. Right now, there's shellfish closures for most of the counties up and down the coast because of this bloom. So right now, you really don't want to be harvesting clams or mussels from our local waters. And this is typically how people end up getting impacted by these types of toxins. They've collected something wild that's fed on that algae in the same way that the sea lions are feeding upon these fish that have fed on the algae. So, you know, wild caught seafood maybe is a problem, but restaurants is probably not a problem. But for arsenic levels, I'll throw that to Tracy.
Yeah, I mean, again, we're learning a little bit more about this. It's going to really depend on how long the arsenic levels are sustained at those levels. And so longer term monitoring is needed to better understand the impact. And so, yeah, I guess that's a tougher one. I would say that it's probably not having an impact on anything that is going to be caught now. And really look, you know, it's going to be sort of a long-term impact. So it may affect seafood over the long haul, but we really need to get a little bit more data to better understand the impacts.
Okay, and then taking back another question from previous to starting the panel, this is from Kiyoko in Santa Monica. This is a question I am definitely concerned about too. So is it safe for my daughter to go in the ocean 3 to 4 times per week with her surf team at Tower 24 in Santa Monica?
Well, we can't definitively say that it is safe. You know, we are observing contaminants in the water. We're detecting them. What we can say is that based on risk threshold assessments, the risk is very low for the areas outside of the burn area. The water quality, even within the burn area, is testing below risk thresholds for many of these contaminants. We need a little bit more time to dig into particularly the arsenic that's in the water, but generally public health experts are saying that, you know, that they've lifted advisories, and we would say that you know, the risk is very low. You know, I do want to make sure that folks know that you don't want to be within 250 yards of debris or active debris removal. And so, you know, we have put out warnings saying that to stay away from the coastline where there is burn debris or where debris removal is happening. And that includes the 250 yards offshore, where you could still be exposed to those contaminants that are being tussled and you know, ending up in the air and then out back in the water. And so we are also concerned about, while we need that debris removed as quickly as possible, we are concerned that it could also be adding some contaminants. But check out our website, Ash to Action, and we have we'll be updating that regularly with information that can help you to figure out where it's safest to swim or play on the beaches.
Okay, thanks for that. And a question back to you, Dave. I'm going to kind of combine two questions that we had. The first question was, do you have any idea why this bloom has affected dolphins more than other blooms have? And then another question someone had that could be involved in this would this kind of force these animals on potentially to migrate elsewhere or kind of be elsewhere because of this? Will it kind of change the patterns of what animals we have here in the Bay?
So why dolphins so much this year? The real answer is, we don't know, but some ideas of what might be going on. It's a really broad space of impacted area right now. So it's basically the whole of the Southern California Bight right now. And that's all of that area below Point Conception down to San Diego. Has now a significant impact from this bloom. So it's really quite massive. And right now we're seeing not just domoic acid in our local waters, but there's another algae out there that's producing a toxin called saxitoxin. It's another type of algal neurotoxin, and it's incredibly potent. And this is now out in our local waters as well. So an idea is that it's the combination of domoic acid and the saxitoxin that might be leading to the higher mortality that we're seeing for dolphins. But right now, we just don't know. We have to do more of that sampling testing to see if we're really truly seeing saxitoxin in any high abundance in our dolphins. And that's new. Normally, these events are one toxin events. It's just domoic acid. We know how it presents itself. And we can kind of, understand from symptoms without testing what's going on with that animal. This time around, animals are much sicker this time than they have been in the past. We think that's because of that second toxin that's in the water. And then will the animals, go someplace else? Unfortunately, probably not, right? The reason why those animals are here is because of the abundance of food that's here. So the animals that we're seeing on the beach, usually, if they haven't vomited it up, have bellies full of food. And they're here because we're having a really, unfortunately, we're having a really great year for upwelling and nutrients in our local waters, which would normally mean an incredible abundance of life. It just is coming with this toxin as well. So they're going to be here as long as the food is here. And then if they could migrate someplace else, unfortunately, the numbers for domoic acid are picking up in Monterey and all along the Central Coast, all the way down to San Diego. So there's really not a safe place right now. And again, just adding to the unprecedented impacts that we're seeing. It's not an overly positive story. I'm sorry for that, but that's sort of the nature of what's happening.
Yeah, and then another question is, how do you respond to mammal alerts from your network of fisheries?
So we belong to what's called the NOAA West Coast Marine Mammal Stranding Network. So we have organizations from Northern California all the way down to San Diego who do the same types of work that we do here in Los Angeles. And we are connected with one another. We share information. Sometimes we share animals. Here in Los Angeles, we're also supported by the California Wildlife Center. That's up in Malibu, and they do rescues up in Malibu, and we get animals from them as well. We're not really connected with fisheries. We are supported by permits from NOAA, but for the most part, we're regulated under the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and that's where our permits come from. So we're not fisheries connected in that way.
Okay, understand. Thank you. Okay, the next question is going to be from Melissa on the chat, who has asked, I'm concerned with my kids being exposed to toxins from the LA fires at the beach this summer. If I wanted to be extra safe, would there be less risk by going to beaches more north in Ventura County? Oh, I think you're muted.
Muted.
Always happens at least once. The sand was tested by the Regional Water Quality Control Board. And in fact, they looked at the areas we would expect to be the worst. So inside the storm drain outfalls, which were bringing rainfall and other things and other debris from the larger burned areas within the Palisades. They looked at the char that was washing up on the beach. And their data showed that generally all of the contaminants were lower than the risk thresholds that are set for residential soil, where you would expect to have, daily exposure. Except for, I think arsenic was above those as well. But again, arsenic is present in our soils. It's naturally occurring here. And what we saw was, certainly higher levels of those contaminants within the burn area and in our storm drain outfalls. And then a pretty significant drop off south of Montana Ave in Santa Monica. And as you move south, really not seeing a whole lot of evidence of impacts from fire-related contaminants. There was a point in time where the wind was blowing north, and so we do see slightly elevated levels at some of the beaches in Malibu. But again, all of the levels are, with the exception of arsenic, are below the risk thresholds that are used for residential soil. And so, we think that, we've been telling people that they can feel pretty comfortable south of Montana Ave in Santa Monica. Certainly, north of Malibu should be pretty low risk as well. And, we want you to avoid touching the debris that is washing up. We are getting reports that less and less debris is washing up over time, which is good. But you should still be careful for physical hazards. Some of the debris that has washed up has been from, wood that has nails in it. We've seen some broken glass. And so particularly in that high tide area, which is going to, wash things back up on shore, you'll want to take some extra precaution. But from a chemical exposure perspective, the risk should be low for playing and recreating on the sand.
Okay, thank you. And then we're going to go for another pre-submitted question. This is from John in El Segundo. What are the most practical and cost-effective ways to reduce nutrient flows entering Southern Californian coastal waters?
Did you say how can we reduce nutrient flows?
Yes.
Well, that's a great question. As Dave spoke to, a lot of this is coming from runoff. So, we have a lot of nutrients throughout our watershed, and a lot of it is coming out through our storm drain system. But actually, one of the top sources of these nutrients is our wastewater treatment plants. So we have plants along our coast, like the Hyperion wastewater treatment plant in El Segundo. And while we got them to do major upgrades 40 years ago, they haven't done many since. And one of the things that we are advocating for now is for denitrification to be able to remove some of those nutrients out of their discharge, which should help with ocean acidification and some of the blooms that we're seeing.
And
just add, a great thing you can do at home is create natural spaces. If you own a home, you have a garden space, natural gardens without pesticides or fertilizers, low water, so low runoff from your yard. So there are definitely things you can do at home to minimize the amount of nutrients going down the drain as well.
And there's, capturing stormwater on site is also a great way to reduce the pollution that's reaching our bay. The number one source of pollution out into our ocean right now is through our storm drain system. And that's both urban runoff, what we sometimes call urban slobber, when you overwater your lawns and it pushes kind of everything out into the storm drain. And so capturing stormwater, you could do that on site by, regrading your landscape. You can install rain barrels or cisterns, and you can support the projects that are happening in your community, whether that's capturing stormwaters in local parks or creating local parks to capture stormwater, and continuing, there's some large scale municipal ones as well. Heal the Bay has a couple of great watershed coordinators. We're part of the Safe Clean Water program run by LA County. And that came out of the 2018 measure where Angelenos actually voted to tax themselves. There's a parcel tax, which about $300 million a year is generated for stormwater capture. And you can get involved with Heal the Bay, and we can help you to make sure that your community is getting stormwater capture projects so that you can also help reduce the pollution that's reaching the bay.
Yeah, they're all great suggestions. I definitely agree, Dave, with the natural spaces and all the things that we can just think about what we kind of just the idea of whatever goes around comes around, this will come back to us. So just being more mindful of how we're interconnected with everything. I'd also love, you obviously spoke a little bit about urban runoff, but just a personal question for mine is just how about agricultural sort of practices? Are they a big reason for sort of harmful toxins running off and creating this algal blooms?
We don't have a lot of agriculture here in Los Angeles, certainly not significantly contributing to what's being discharged into the Santa Monica Bay. It can be more significant in other places, but I'll let Dave see if he's got.
Yeah, I think one of the really surprising things is some similar quantities of herbicides, pesticides, and fertilizers come out of our urban systems as come out of our agricultural systems. So I think, yes, we do have an issue with, nutrient runoff and chemical runoff from agricultural systems, but it's not the only place that it's coming from. It comes from our own cities as well. So we can do things on a lot of levels to, regenerative agriculture is a wonderful thing. We should be thinking more about that. Write your congressman, ask him about it, or her about it. But these are minimizing the amount of nutrient that comes into the ocean is probably one of the bigger things that we can act on right now, and see an impact in shorter time periods than we can for some of these things like ocean acidification and climate change. We can make big changes on all fronts, but if we can minimize the total number of insults that we're giving to the ocean, if we can do something about nutrient inputs, if we can do something about overfishing, if we can do something about plastic pollutions, if we can lower the number of things that our wildlife have to deal with, we might add some better resilience into our system, recognizing that we're not going to solve all of these problems right away.
Yeah, and I know Tracy mentioned at the beginning, there's only so much the ocean can take for us. Obviously, we're always told that it's this incredible sort of resilient and regenerative environment, but only so much, clearly, as we're seeing really the sickness of the mammals poorly across our coastline. And just so people are aware, we're also recording this. So if you did join late or you want to share this with someone afterwards, we are recording it. So in the pre-submitted questions, several people asked this: how do warmer ocean temperatures lead to more algal blooms, and what action can local communities take to reduce this?
So I think Tracy and I can probably both go for this one. But when we think about our ocean ecosystem, it's an ecosystem. It's full of lots of different species. Most of those species are microbial. They're tiny, and we don't know a whole lot about them. But when we make the ocean more rich with nutrients, when we make the ocean warmer in temperature, and when we make the ocean more acidic, we're shifting the ocean's chemistry and changing the sort of the things that these organisms are specialized in doing, right? And certain species are going to thrive under different conditions. We don't know exactly what the secret sauce for each individual species is, but when we step back and we can look at the whole system, we see with all of these things that we're doing to the ocean, an increase in the frequency and intensity of harmful algal blooms. So there's not one thing that we're doing that's changing the conditions and leading to these problems that we're seeing. It's the combination of everything that we're putting into the ocean that's causing that problem. So it's a hard one to answer. It's not a simple formula. It's complex.
And an additional question that's kind of on the same theme was someone has asked, I heard there were up to 5 different algal blooms in the water right now. And also results came back from necroposes. Sorry if I pronounce it.
Yeah.
Okay, on some of the whales, and that they suffered from domoic acid toxosis too. Is this true?
Yeah, I'll start with the whales. We had a minke whale that swam into Long Beach Harbor. That one did come back testing positive in high numbers to domoic acid. So it's a likely domoic acid cause of death. It's hard to know exactly. We have very few whales that have all of the sampling so that we, like Tracy was saying, we don't have a baseline to know what is the toxic level. But basically, we saw high levels of domoic acid inside this animal, and it's likely the cause of death. There was an animal that stranded, a humpback whale back in January that also had high levels of domoic acid. So we're still not entirely sure, but the likelihood is that domoic acid is playing a role in the animals that are feeding here locally, right? With gray whales, we've seen a mass mortality event for gray whales this year. They typically don't feed in these waters, so it'd be unlikely that domoic acid would be a reason for their demise locally. But again, sampling would have to tell us that to be able to know. And unfortunately, right now, we are in the process of rescuing animals, bringing them back here, and we've already exceeded our budgets. And testing is one of those things that we need to find more funding to support. But right now we're taking samples from necropsies from our animals, and we're storing those tissues and fluids that would be important to look at in a future down the road to be able to say whether or not it was saxitoxin, domoic acid, or whatever else we might find in those samples. As far as 5 algae, there are half a gajillion algae out there right now. Earlier in the season, at the beginning of the bloom, the only thing that you'd find in a plankton sample locally was pseudonychia. There wasn't a different species. And then as the bloom progressed, we started to see a red tide here locally, so some more dinoflagellates coming into the system, a little bit more diversity, unfortunately, bringing another toxin into play. And then there's another dinoflagellate out there that creates a sea foam that it can be a problem for seabirds. It can cause them to lose insulation in their feathers. So it's another type of harmful algal bloom that can impact seabirds in particular. These wouldn't affect marine mammals. It affects birds because of what it does to their feathers. So I know of 3. Maybe there's 2 more that I don't know of.
Thanks for those very informative answers. And I know you just mentioned a little bit that obviously a lot of these things need funding, and you're obviously already seeing so many animals in this quarter, more than you see in a year. And I'll say this again at the end, but obviously Tracy and Dave are coming from 2 great organizations that we can all help to share their work with others is a great first step. And obviously donating, if you can, is an incredible step to help all these testing and just care that you're giving these animals. Just going back to testing, we had a question from Lisa in Playa del Rey. There are various different post-fire water quality test results from different sources. How do citizens know what's accurate?
So we have looked at the different water quality data that's been posted by the different organizations, as well as the different sand testing that's been conducted. What we can tell you is that they're all pretty consistent. No one is showing wildly worse water quality or wildly worse sand quality. I think you're getting potentially some different interpretations of the data. And that is because it's really challenging to figure out what the right, risk threshold is. There's no sand risk threshold for recreational contact. Most public health experts have been looking at the residential soil risk threshold level. So, what would be considered toxic or hazardous if it was in the soil outside of your home. And using that data, many of us have concluded that the risk from recreating on the sand is really low, is pretty low. There are other folks out there that have been looking at potentially other risk thresholds. And we are trying to track that down right now to better understand why they might be coming up with some different conclusions, but the data itself is all really consistent.
Okay. That's good. And then one person has asked here on the chat, I don't remember where I read this, but can it also affect dogs? I guess dogs.
Only if your dog is eating a tremendous number of clams and mussels when they're at the beach, or drinking copious amounts of seawater, which I think is going to cause your dog issues on its own. So no, domoic acid is only affects an animal that's been eating other animals that have concentrated that toxin in their tissues. So you won't get it just from swimming in the water or touching the water, or even swallowing a little bit of water if you're in the surf. You're not going to get a concentration of domoic acid.
Okay, that's good to know. And then another question we had was, how safe is the marine environment near the Channel Islands?
So we don't expect that the fire contaminants traveled across to the Channel Islands, particularly with any concentrations that would be able to be detected through laboratories. We get an incredible amount of dilution in the ocean. So even if the currents are moving in that direction, the concentrations should decrease pretty significantly, particularly when you're heading out over the ocean. This is a very different situation than, like the wastewater treatment plants that we've been talking about that are putting out hundreds of millions of gallons every day of contaminants into the ocean. This is a situation where we had 3 very large, very significant pollutant loading events with the 2 rains and the ash deposition. And then obviously we have the 327 homes that unfortunately burned along PCH. And, many of those were already built on top of the high tide line. And so the debris fell within the high tide line. And every day the ocean is lapping more contaminants into the ocean, but not at significant enough quantities to impact human health for recreational contact. Again, the marine life are much more sensitive. They're living in it. That's their habitat. They're eating all their food. And so they're going to be, their risk thresholds are going to be much lower than a human that is going out and swimming and surfing for a couple hours a day. Even folks that are really ambitious and going out, every day for 6 months.
Yeah, well, I'd love to shift our focus to now what we can all really do. I know obviously everyone has great questions here in the chat, and I'm sure like me, you're a concerned citizen, but you really want to shift into what can we do next. So I'd love to hear from you both. What could we be doing in our day-to-day lives individually? Obviously, we spoke a little bit about like what we kind of put out into the water systems and storm drains. And I'd also love to hear what can we do locally, federally, globally, on a political kind of stance. Like, are there any particular things happening right now, campaigns that we can get behind to sort of, make sure that we, basically make a healthier world for us all? So yeah, could you each share just your ideas for action?
Tracy, you want to start?
Sure. I guess, the first thing is that, in January, Los Angeles joined a really small and tragic club of being impacted by an urban mega fire. And we know that we aren't going to be the last one. So, these are climate-driven events. And so actions that you can take to mitigate climate change, reduce your carbon footprint, advocate for climate change policy, I think is gonna be necessary to reduce the impacts of these in the future. The toxicity of this event was so severe because so much of our life is filled with toxic chemicals from the plastic that makes up our rugs and our couches. And so I think being really mindful about what you purchase is also really helpful. Because we know this won't be the last urban mega fire. And I think any actions you can take right now to reduce pollution reaching the bay. We see a lot of single-use plastic on out on our beaches and out in the ocean. Particularly, those break down really small over time. And then when they're out in the water, fish are eating them and it's, having harmful effects on their health as well. So I think we just don't want to exacerbate the conditions that our marine life and that we as humans who live along the coast are experiencing already. So transitioning to more reusables and helping organizations like Heal the Bay advocate for and pass legislation to reduce the production of single-use plastics would be really helpful. Our oceans are facing a number of threats right now. And so there are things you can do on a number of fronts to help reduce the impacts of those. Organizations like Heal the Bay and Marine Mammal Care Center offer opportunities to get involved. So, for Heal the Bay, come and join us for a beach cleanup. Find other ways to volunteer. We have really cool community science programs, from our eDNA work to our MPA Watch program. And I think that there's something that you can, taking action can create hope in a time where things feel so hopeless. And so we invite you to join us and take action.
I'll add to that and say, Heal the Bay and Marine Mammal Care Center are both nonprofit organizations whose primary funding, I'm going to guess here, Tracy, is through individual donation. We have very little government support and funding. And it's really people like you who are watching this that are supporting the work that we do. Not everybody has that opportunity to be able to contribute financially. And so the thing that we all have and the thing we can all do is use our voice. Bonnie, you said, should we get involved politically? And absolutely. And that doesn't have to be a bad word. We should be involved civically in the things that matter to us in our day-to-day lives, right? And we don't do that enough. And it's not hard to do. And we don't have to wait for a presidential election cycle to use our voice. We don't have to wait for a state election to use our voice. A lot of really important things can happen at the municipal level. Tracy mentioned the Hyperion plant in Los Angeles. Huge impacts, and that's all at a local level. We can do that, and we need to be doing that because we want our elected officials to represent our ideas, the things that we find to be important. We want them to solve that. And the only way that we can help them to understand is through using our voice and letting them know. And so I would encourage everybody on here to get on. It's not hard to do, to find your local municipal elected officials, mayors, city council members, and let them know that you're concerned about what's happening in our coastal ocean environment, and that they should be supporting organizations that are helping with city services like Heal the Bay and their beach report card, and like the Marine Mammal Care Center that's rescuing these animals off of our public beaches that are a health hazard for people. They're dangerous animals on our local crowded public beaches. But the services that we provide should be recognized by our local governments as well and supported by those local governments. So from regulation to supporting the nonprofits that provide services to our local cities, these are all things that can be really important. They can be accomplished, but they can only be accomplished if we're sharing and letting our elected officials know. So that, I think, is one of the most powerful things that people can do.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think for so many of us, maybe, this experience of the fires or these mammals kind of in distress is really, knocking on our door. This isn't something anymore that's out of sight, out of mind, under the, ocean waters. It's really at our doorstep, so to speak. So I think, as I said earlier, really shifting that energy to action is just the best thing you can do after this phone call. And also share that with others. That's always the best way to amplify something. If you can share this recording with other people, and Heal the Bay and Marine Mammal Care. Someone did ask earlier, which is maybe a question we could answer. Is there any way, obviously, if people can't donate to you guys, Dave, is there any way that people can physically participate in any things that you're doing or volunteer in any way?
Yeah, absolutely. Both of our organizations have robust volunteer opportunities. Right now, we're looking for support for our education department, for talking to people about the animals. We have a center here. You can always come and visit us as well. Heal the Bay has an aquarium on the pier too. You can visit them to learn more about all of these issues. You can come to see the patients that are recovering from domoic acid toxicosis here at the center. That is a wonderful thing that people can do. We actually we got some great support early on for this. We added 100 new volunteers early on to support what we call our Pinniped Patrol. So these are people that are on our local public beaches helping to inform the public, to keep the public safe and to keep the animals safe as well.
That's great. Well, thank you for sharing. And again, I know we shared earlier the emails if people have any further questions, but we are almost at time. So just want to thank you both so much for sharing everything that you have. I don't know if you have any closing remarks that you want to share before we close out, Tracy or Dave.
I just want to thank you, Bonnie, for moderating us through this conversation and being such an incredible advocate. And I know you have an amazing book that came out a few years ago and a documentary. So thank you for being an environmental champion and helping to bring other people into this movement. And thank you to the nearly 200 people who showed up to listen to us talk today, and looking forward to continuing to partner with all of you and to making this world a healthier place.
Yeah, thank everybody for caring so much to join us today, and come see us in person. Come on down, check us out. We'd love to have you.
Amazing. Well, thank you all for attending our Changing Tides webinar, and thank you, Tracy and Dave. And as I said before, strong local advocacy and community work is so essential in tackling the climate environmental issues. So thank you all for leading the way, and thank you, Tracy and Dave. And yeah, hope to see you all out at some community events of both these great organizations. And again, please donate if you can to these amazing organizations. So thank you all for joining.
Thank you so much.